When a daughter falls, a mother-daughter karma story. The village lay deep within a semi-mountainous region, where summers burned red with rows of flame trees, and winters were so bitter cold that not even birds bothered to sing at dawn. At the edge of that village, next to a dry stone well and an ancient fig tree, stood a humble clay-walled hut belonging to a poor couple, Allah Bayzaya and his wife, Sakina. They had nothing to their names but love, a few vegetables grown around the house, and unwavering faith in the Almighty. For years, the only thing they ever prayed for was a child, a missing piece that might make the world feel less empty. And then, on a misty late winter morning, as Sakina doubled over in searing abdominal pain while tending the fire, the child arrived. A girl. They named her Nayib, meaning precious, one of a kind. The entire village came to see. Not out of curiosity, but out of joy for the couple who had lived too long in silence and longing. Nayib grew up wrapped in warmth and adoration, as though she were a heavenly treasure. She had wide eyes like longans, milky skin that glowed softly, and most striking of all, a voice so delicate it seemed spun from the sky. When she babbled her first words, her mother burst into tears. Not from joy, but from fear. Fear that her child would have to face a world so quick to harm the innocent. Each night, Sakina would rock her daughter to sleep on a creaky wooden bed, humming lullabies passed down from her grandmother. Outside, the wind shook the dry banana leaves, but inside, there was a warmth only those who've yearned for children can understand. Sleep now, love, your mother is near. The world outside has yet to call your name. Close your eyes, let the night rest soft. Ignore the wind's howl or your mother's trembling. But within that peace, karma had begun to spin its first, fine thread. For love without wisdom can become a blade. And when a mother gives everything without teaching what it means to lose, the price may be the child's very life. By age 8, Nayib could make her parents laugh with just a pout. At 10, she faked a sulk to win an extra hair clip. At 13, she was dubbed the village beauty, constantly teased wherever she went. Her father, Allah Bayzaya, looked upon her with pride. But that pride blinded him to early warning signs, when she began using her mother's old lipstick, mimicked TV actresses' walks, and refused to go to school because she didn't like the teacher. She's still a child, that's just what kids do, Sakina brushed it off when her husband frowned. No, Sakina, our daughter's drifting off course. Don't spoil her too much. But she wouldn't listen. Once a silent wife through childless winters, she now clung desperately to the feeling of being a mother. And then, the inevitable came. When Nayib turned 16, a seemingly trivial event would unleash a cascade of tragedy. She demanded a smartphone, because all her classmates had one and she couldn't live like a cave woman. Her father had just left for the Middle East to earn extra money. Sakina initially refused. But her daughter's cold stare, her silent hunger strike, she couldn't bear it. Eyes shut, heartbreaking, she handed it over. Just this once, my love, just once. If you're still watching this video and want to follow Nayib's transformation, please comment the number 1 below so I know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed, I recommend hitting the bell. Your support helps us continue making meaningful, inspiring content. What no one knew was that the phone wasn't just a device. It was a key, one that would unlock the gate of karma and lure Nayib into a world of illusion, desire, and betrayal. The phone, sleek, shiny, and feather-light, like a sacred jewel, was bought from the only shop in the district lit by a solar-powered sign. When her mother brought it home, Nayib squealed like she had just been crowned Miss Universe. Why didn't you get this sooner? Everyone else has one already. Sakinah gave a faint smile, her trembling hands still gripping the plastic bag. Something cracked in her eyes. But she told herself, as long as she's happy, as long as she comes home, eats well, sleeps in peace, that's enough. But from that moment on, Nayib never looked at her mother the same way again. The phone became a black mirror, reflecting every flaw through the eyes of a 16-year-old. My mom's so backward, doesn't even know how to use filters. If you don't have TikTok, don't talk about modern times. Don't touch my phone, Mom, your hands smell like onions. Sakinah heard each word like water seeping through cracked walls, silent, slow, and devastating. But she endured. She believed her daughter would change with age. That one day, she'd understand. That she'd come back and hold her like she used to. What she didn't realize was that the digital world had done what lullabies could not. It pulled her child away from reality, from responsibility, from love. Nayib became a stranger. She stayed up past 2 a.m. to live stream, wore headphones all day, and smirked when her mother called for help in the kitchen. She no longer prayed, that was outdated. Instead, she snapped selfies with angelic filters, though her soul was growing hollow. One day, as Sakinah crouched to clean the cracked cement floor, she softly hummed an old lullaby. Sleep, my child, the winds blow far. I have nothing but breath and tears to give. Nayib looked up from her phone and snapped. Oh my God, Mom. Can you stop? People can hear that on live stream. You sound like a peasant. Sakinah froze. The tile slipped from her hand. She stood slowly, unsure of what had just happened. Not because the words were too cruel, but because in that instant, she realized she was no longer a mother. Just a background app, running silently, without permission to intervene. Then came the next turning point, a small moment, but pivotal. Nayib shoved her mother out of the room during a video call with a strange boy. Get out. Can't you see I'm busy? Or are you spying on me now? Sakinah said nothing. But something inside her went cold. Very cold. That night, she stood before the family altar, where a small photo of her late father sat, a man who had died before Nayib was born, and whispered a prayer. If I'm wrong, let me see it soon. If she must pay a price, don't take her away from me. But karma does not heed desperate prayers. It follows only its own laws. When a seed is planted with disrespect, watered by greed, and fed with pride, it grows into pain. There are no shortcuts. Weeks later, Sakinah caught her daughter sending seductive selfies to a stranger. Her face flushed with rage. For the first time ever, she slapped Nayib. Just one slap, not painful, but carrying the weight of a betrayed childhood. Nayib's eyes flared. She said nothing, just pushed her mother to the floor. For the first time, her eyes burned not with anger, but liberation. Don't touch me. This is my life. I'll live how I want. Who are you to interfere? Sakinah didn't cry. But when she stood up, her face had turned pale. Her eyes no longer held fury, only a quiet, aching question. What did I raise, that now resembles a beast? And then, on a seemingly ordinary day, the phone buzzed. Nayib smiled at the message. I'm thinking of you. Would you dare run away? That message was like a voice from the abyss. All it takes is one glance down, and there's no way back. That night, in the earthen house gone dark, the only light came from the glow of Nayib's phone screen. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but because, for the first time, she felt in control of her own fate. The boy on the screen, saved as Z beloved, whispered, "If you really love me, come tonight. I'll be waiting at the old crossroad. Bring nothing but love, and a little cash." His words were like poisoned wine, sweet, heady, intoxicating, with a blade hidden behind the kiss. But Nayab didn't see it. Or more truthfully, she didn't want to. She stood up quietly, passing her mother's room, the woman who had silently wept after being shoved to the ground that afternoon. The woman who hadn't eaten dinner. Who had left the lamp dim, still waiting for an apology that would never come. Nayab looked inside. There was nothing but the sound of slow, steady breathing from a worn-out body. Her mother had long grown used to pain, without comfort, without complaint. She turned away and walked into her father's room. Creak, the wooden chest opened. Inside, a few small gold bangles remained, a bundle of cash wrapped in coarse cloth, and a weathered love letter her father had once written to her mother. Without hesitation, she took it all. She looked only once, not to remember, but to make sure she was free enough to walk away from that house forever. The night wind was icy, but her heart burned with warmth. She imagined a future glowing with light. Z would meet her on his motorbike, they'd escape to a new city, rent a tiny place just for the two of them, to love, to laugh, to finally live a real life with no mother nagging, no father scolding. She arrived at the intersection. No one there. Only a flickering yellow street light swaying like a ghost, and a chill wind slipping through her thin shirt. An hour passed before Z arrived. He came on foot, not a bike, his expression rushed. "You really came," he said, voice soft like clouds, but his eyes weren't on her face, they locked onto the money bag. "Let me hold that for you," he said, then stepped away quickly. "Wait here, I'll go rent a bike." And then, he vanished. Forever. Nayab waited. 1 hour. 2. 3. By the time dawn approached, she was still sitting there, her shirt soaked in dew, her feet numb, her phone dead. Her heart, slowly caving in. An old man passed by, leaning on a bamboo cane. He didn't ask who she was. He simply murmured, "What are you running from?" Or, "What wrong place are you chasing?" She broke down, crying harder than ever before. She told him everything, about love, suffocation, betrayal, and the creeping hunger in her belly. He looked at her with eyes deep as ancient trees. "If it's not too late, go home. Before the sun rises." Fathers and mothers aren't eternal. But their hearts wait longer than anyone else's. Nayab returned home. She crept in like a thief, of herself. Her mother was still asleep. Her father still not back. Everything was quiet, as though nothing had happened. Only her fingers trembled as she pulled the blanket up to her chin. The next morning, her mother discovered all the money and gold were gone. She wept. Not for the loss of wealth, but for the final loss of her daughter. But Nayab didn't confess. She stayed silent. She chose denial, because to admit it would mean owning up to a dream she now felt ashamed of ever believing in. A few days later, Z texted again. "Want to keep your dignity? Send more money. If not, your pics will flood the internet." Nayab froze. She had nothing left to give. Her father hadn't returned yet. And he made good on his threat. The pictures, those love shots taken with her mother's phone, spread like wildfire. Everyone in the neighborhood saw them. When her father came home, he didn't yell. He didn't hit her. He didn't even speak. He just collapsed. And never woke up again. The day of the funeral, it rained. A cold, punishing rain. Her mother wore mourning robes, but her eyes held no anger. No sorrow. Only a vast emptiness, cold as the stove that had long lost its flame. And Nayib still held her head high. She thought she was strong. That she could survive this. She didn't know karma hadn't even begun to collect its debt. And what was coming wasn't punishment from others, but the slow descent born from her own pride. After her father's funeral, Nayib shed no tears. Not because she felt no pain, but because her tears had died the day she was betrayed at that village crossroads. She wore black for 3 days, a patched-together gesture of grief, then returned to her phone. Or more accurately, to a new version of herself, bolder, colder, defiant in her despair. "No one's going to protect you, Nayib," she whispered to herself. "If you want to live, you have to drown the past." Her mother, Sakinah, grew quieter with each day. She no longer scolded. No longer spoke of the father. The tiny home felt like a living tomb, where two souls existed side by side, without ever touching. Then one day, another message came. Not from Z, but a stranger's account. Yet the writing felt familiar. "You're still as beautiful as the day we met. But now, I need a favor." Attached was a short voice clip, her giggling voice, soft whispers, and a few more photos, ones never posted. "If you don't want the whole village to know more, send me some cash. Don't wait until it's too late." Nayib smirked bitterly. Her pockets were empty. But in her mind, a thought began to grow. "I may not have money, but I still have a body, a voice, a right to exist. So why not trade it for a new life?" She started job hunting, not at grocery stores or cafes, but places looking for discreet girls, willing to travel, with good looks. Within 3 days, a message arrived. "You've been selected. No interview needed. Private deal. High pay. Fly to Dubai. Change your life." Attached, a one-way ticket. That night, as she slipped away from home, her mother sat against the kitchen wall, clutching her husband's photo. The wind shook the straw roof, the oil lamp flickered. Sakinah felt her heart shrink. An invisible dread. A storm coming. Days later, she collapsed at the doorstep. As if, when Nayib's father left this world, he had taken her heart with him. And it no longer had the strength to stay. They took her to the hospital. Diagnosis: deep coma. No reflexes. No awareness. And Nayib? No one knew. She had climbed into a stranger's car, traveling through provinces like a drifting shadow. The man who picked her up never gave a name. He didn't touch her, not at first. But his eyes were always probing. And one hand rested near his waist, where a small blade hid. They locked her in a windowless concrete room. With 3 other girls. One had screamed herself hoarse. One stared endlessly at the wall. One was pregnant. "You're all going to Dubai," the man said. "Easy jobs. Big pay. Fancy clients." A girl whispered. "What if we don't want to go?" He laughed, not drunk, but dripping with dried blood. "Then you stay here. With the rats, the roaches, and hunger." On the 3rd night, Nayib heard screaming. She didn't know who was being beaten. But each cry cut like a knife through the dream of her childhood. When she once believed the world consisted only of her parents and a hairbrush. She began screaming, too. But no one heard. Or maybe, karma had already deafened them all. A week later, they forced her to sign departure papers. She knew, once she boarded that plane, she would never return. Not because of distance, but because she'd be torn apart, body and soul. She resisted. And for the first time, she was beaten until unconscious. They tore up her documents, chained her ankles, locked her in a pitch-black room, no lights, no door. Only the sound of her own breath, like a knife grinding against stone. In her haze, she heard her father's voice. "I'll be home soon, stay safe, don't leave your mother." And her mother's lullaby. "Sleep, child, I'm still here. The world hasn't called your name yet." She cried. Not from pain, but because she had heard those words, far too late. The place she was locked in was a low, damp cellar, the ceiling so low that if she stood up, her forehead would strike stone. The scent of mold mixed with old urine clung to her skin like an invisible shackle. Nayib lost count of the days. Maybe it was day 6. Or 13. But the only thing she knew for sure was this: she could no longer feel the sun. And she could no longer feel herself. The man still came daily, along with strange faces, part pimps, part clients, browsing like they were picking meat. One of them looked at Nayib and whispered to the handler, "This one's worthless. Too skinny, eyes dead." Nayib heard it. And strangely, she felt relieved. Because what terrified her most now wasn't being sold, it was being kept. Kept like a caged dog, not dead, but no longer called human. Then one night, no one knows what day it was, Nayib was thrown into the back of a truck, blindfolded, wrists tied. 3 other girls were with her, trembling like dry leaves. They were told they'd be crossing the border, then continuing with fake papers. But halfway, the truck veered off course. The driver muttered, "Paid me," then complained, "Screw that." They pulled off on a deserted road, nearly deep in forest. They dragged Nayib out, beat her savagely until she could no longer move. "She's unsellable," one of them said. "No one will know if she dies," another added. And then they left her, blood-soaked, motionless on the muddy ground, her wounds seeping into the dirt, washed by rain. The next morning, someone found her, a woman who'd gotten lost while foraging herbs. She saw the bruised, twisted body curled beneath an old tamarind tree and screamed. Nayib was rushed to the district hospital. The doctors said, "Severe brain trauma. Multiple broken ribs. Blood infection." They tried everything. But when a body has already been shredded by karmic weight, medicine becomes powerless. If you're still watching this video and praying for the release of a lost soul, please comment the number 2 below to let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we recommend hitting the. Your support helps us continue making meaningful content to inform and inspire. At the same time, in another hospital, Sakinah, Nayib's mother, woke from her coma. The first thing she asked was, "Where is my daughter?" No one answered. Only a look of pity in the nurse's eyes. And a patient file on the table, its last line read, "Deceased at 3:47 a.m. No known relatives." No one dared to tell her the truth. But a week later, the news reached the village. And the mother, though never officially informed, knew. in the way only a mother who has carried a child inside her can know. "My girl, she's gone, hasn't she?" No one replied. But the wind blew in from her husband's grave. The fig tree in the yard shed its leaves, in a month with no rain. Nayib's funeral, if it could be called that, was a rushed chant in a morgue reserved for the unclaimed. A pale white sheet. A death certificate with no photo. No family claimed her. No flowers. No candles. Just a few people from her old neighborhood whispered. "She was really beautiful, what a waste." Girls nowadays, you can't teach them anything. Dad's dead, mom was in a coma, dying like that was probably mercy. Her body was eventually brought back to the village after weeks of paperwork. They laid her in a small room. Women from the neighborhood came to wash her. But as water touched her skin, a horrid stench rose up. "Oh my God, why does she smell so bad?" one woman cried. "Is this the smell of sin?" another muttered. They wore masks, washed her like they were scrubbing a drowned animal. No one dared touch her face. Some wanted to walk away. "Let's just bury her, no one can bear this," a woman gasped. But an elderly man from the village, once a teacher of sacred texts, shouted, "She is human. She is someone's daughter. She was once sung to sleep, nursed, and called the light of her family. You do not have the right to decide if she's worth cleansing." Everyone fell silent. Then, trembling hands resumed. With choked prayers. Because they were afraid, but they also knew. If they abandoned her now, they would be abandoning their own conscience. That night, as they prepared to bury her, a storm came. Heavy rain poured. The road flooded. Winds howled. Candle flames sputtered and died. They couldn't dig the grave. Each time they dug, water rose up and filled it. A young man, his face muddy, whispered, "She doesn't want to be buried. Or maybe, the earth refuses her." Then, someone in the crowd suddenly spoke. I had a dream. To bury her, you must include her phone and her speaker." Everyone exchanged looks. Another added, "If that's what she lived for, maybe that's the punishment. Or the truth." No one knew if it was right. But they started to believe. Some karmic bonds, if not resolved, follow a soul even into death. That night, the rain never stopped. They tried everything, raincoats to shield the body, flashlights to light the way, even an old tarp borrowed from a tea stall to keep the coffin lid dry. Then something strange happened. As they placed the phone and music speaker, the very soul of who Nayib had once been, onto her body. The rain slowed. Not entirely. But just enough for the downpour to soften into a whisper. Like tears dripping from the deep earth itself. Everyone looked around. No one spoke. But all understood. The karma she bore had not only tormented her in life. It made even the land hesitate to receive her in death. When Nayib's body was finally lowered into the grave, the old religious teacher's voice trembled as he recited prayers. But by the third verse, he stopped. His face turned pale. His hands gripped the prayer beads. But the beads slipped through his fingers. "What is that smell?" someone asked. No one dared answer. Because from the grave, a putrid stench rose, thick and no longer earthly. As though something beyond flesh was dissolving. A young man stepped forward to look. And then screamed. Her mouth, it's wide open. Her tongue, it's hanging out. And something is crawling out of her ears. Silence. One old woman fainted. Another burst into tears. Some fled in panic. But the funeral must continue. And the dead must be buried. The wind howled again. An elder barked. Hurry. Cover her. If we delay, her karma will spread. They began to throw dirt, faster. Hands shaking. Hearts pounding. As if they weren't just burying a corpse, but sealing away a warning from another world. Afterward, everyone left quickly. No one dared return. That night, no one slept soundly. Each person heard the wind howling from the direction of the cemetery, like someone sobbing, unable to form words. The next morning, several people dreamed of Nayib. In their dreams, she sat curled up inside the grave, clutching her phone tightly, her eyes vacant. She said nothing. She only cried, tears flowing into the void, never soaking into the earth. The following day, the village imam, who hadn't arrived in time for her burial, heard what had happened. He frowned. Then declared firmly, "You were wrong. You do not bury the dead with worldly items like that. You have confused compassion with superstition." Then he ordered, "Unseal the grave. Remove those things. Pray again. Even if it's late." And so they returned to her grave. This time, the sun shone. The earth was dry. Digging came easily. When the coffin lid was opened, silence fell. Nayib, who had once filled the village with dread, now lay still, her face peaceful, her lips gently closed. Her tongue no longer protruded. Her eyes remained shut, but sunlight fell on her face, forming a faint halo. And most striking of all, the foul stench was gone. In its place was a faint aroma, like sandalwood, or freshly steamed sticky rice. The imam wasn't surprised. He bowed his head, one hand over his chest. "This is a sign of forgiveness." Someone asked. "But why? She committed so many sins." The imam answered softly, but his voice rang like scripture. "Because her mother forgave her." Back in that dim little house, around the time the grave was reopened, Ksitigarbha, after learning the news of her daughter's death, didn't scream, didn't curse. People told her everything: the kidnapping, the beating, the sale. The mother simply laid out a prayer mat, knelt down, and rested her head on her daughter's old scarf, the very one Nayib had once thrown away when her mother tried to wipe her sweat. She bowed her head, and for the first time, prayed aloud. "It was my fault. I loved too much and forgot to teach her right from wrong. I made her think that love meant indulgence. If God is listening, please, don't punish my child anymore. Take my years instead. Give her one peaceful sleep in return." And that night, in a strange dream, Nayib came back to her mother. She didn't speak. She simply sat beside her mother's pillow, gently touched her hand. In the dream, her mother opened her eyes, and saw her daughter not as the fierce, defiant girl she'd become, but with the eyes of the little girl who once softly called out, "Mom." They say, fragrance belongs to heaven. It does not belong to humans, much less to a grave. And yet, in the days after Nayib's exhumation, no one could explain why. That grave, once filled with rot and horror, now exuded a gentle scent, like sacred incense, like a prayer that had never found words. Those who had once shoveled dirt over her, those who saw maggots crawl from her ears, her tongue lolling in terror, now visited her grave every evening. They brought white flowers, a bowl of cool water, and something they'd never carried before, remorse. They began whispering, "She doesn't deserve to be cursed forever. She was a victim, like so many others we never taught, only blamed when they went astray." One mother, whose daughter had just turned 17, sat before Nayib's grave, her eyes brimming. She murmured, as if to herself, "I used to say, my daughter will never end up like that Nayib girl. But now, I'm not so sure. Because I've never once asked where my daughter hurts." From that day on, strange things happened in the village. Not miracles, but changes. Small changes. In people's eyes. In the way they breathed. They began paying closer attention to their children. They no longer laughed when a young girl cried over love. They no longer mocked a child who stole. Instead they asked, "Who taught her? Who left him behind?" And most of all, they began to visit Sakinah, not with pity, but to listen. If you're still watching this video and wish to share the pain and strength of Sakinah's journey, please comment the number 8 below to let us know you're with us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we invite you to do so and hit the Your support helps us continue making meaningful content to inform and inspire. Sakinah, since awakening, was no longer just the poor widow in a faded scarf, sitting quietly at the market's corner. She became a storyteller. Not of fairy tales, but of truth. The story of a daughter who was once light, then became shadow, and finally returned as a message for an entire village. She didn't speak with bitterness. She spoke like someone who had loved her child to the bone, hurt to the marrow, and forgiven. Not out of hope, but out of truth. "I blame no one," she said, with eyes that no longer carried tears. "I only hope that those who have children understand. Love does not mean letting go. And discipline does not mean commanding. We become parents to stop our children from falling into the abyss. Not to stand and weep after they've already fallen." One evening, after a prayer service at the small village mosque, the imam, the same man who had called for the grave to be reopened, asked everyone to stand in a minute of silence. "To honor," he said, "the one who was forgiven, after it was too late." Then he added, "Nayib was not a heretic. She was the proof of the Almighty's mercy. Had her mother not forgiven her, she would never have found rest. But because her mother knelt, because she apologized, even for the part that wasn't her fault, the gates of heaven opened. And I ask you, if a mother can forgive like that, why do we, strangers, cling to our hate?" The mosque fell silent. A soft breeze drifted through, carrying a strange sweetness in the air. No one could describe it, but all felt it. Something had changed. Not because someone died, but because so many of the living had never truly learned to forgive others and themselves. That night, Sakinah dreamed again. In her dream, she saw her daughter step out from a withered lotus garden, dressed in white, her long hair flowing. Gone were the weary eyes. Gone was the defiance. Nayib smiled, stepped closer, gently held her mother's hand. "Mom, I'm sorry. If I could do it all over, I'd choose to stay beside you. The moment you called and I didn't answer. But now I understand. You never abandoned me. I just ran too fast away from a kind of love I wasn't mature enough to understand." The next morning, Sakinah woke, not crying. She took out an old notebook. And on the first page, she wrote, "If repentance runs deep enough, it can transcend death. The story of Nayib didn't end with a grave. It spread, like a wind slipping through every crack in the doors of that poor village. Not carrying the stench of death, but the scent of something lost. People began speaking her name again. No longer as a curse, but as a sigh. She used to be such a good girl, the kind everyone praised. But no one ever asked, when did she start changing? At the secondary school where Nayib once studied, a young girl named Afra now sat at the same desk Nayib used to occupy. Afra was quiet, had few friends, spent most breaks looking at her phone. No teacher noticed. Her parents were away working in another province, and she stayed with her grandmother. One day, the homeroom teacher discovered a suicide note in her notebook. Afra didn't die, by some miracle. But one line in the note sent chills down every reader's spine. I don't know who I am, and no one ever asks. I don't cry anymore, because no one sees. I just want to know, if I disappeared, would anyone notice? That letter reached the ears of the Imam and Sakinah. Neither was surprised. Sakinah came to the school, sat beside Afra, and held her hand, saying nothing for 10 minutes. Then she told her a story. About a beautiful girl. About a phone. About betrayal. About a mother who only realized her mistakes when it was too late. Afra didn't cry, but her eyes began to flicker, like a dying lamp that had just been given a bit of oil. From that day on, she never looked at her phone for more than 10 minutes at home. She began asking her grandmother, "Are you tired?" And for the first time, she visited a grave, to leave a single flower, for someone she had never met. That small act rippled through the village. People said, some who've died, still save the living. Some graves don't bury bodies, but bury the blind illusions of a generation. The village school teacher started a weekly sharing circle. Students could talk about anything they'd seen, felt, or feared. No need to be right. No need to be perfect. Just honest. The first to stand was a 9th grade boy. I used to think, my mom didn't understand anything, he said. But yesterday, I sat quietly and listened to her talk with my grandma. And I saw her cry. That was the first time I realized my mom wasn't always strong. The class went silent. Several lowered their heads. The teacher smiled gently. Good. You've seen the part of adults they try so hard to hide. Sakinah remained the same, still thin, still with a curved back, hands trembling as she washed vegetables. But anyone who visited her house was greeted with tea, and a story about her daughter. Told calmly. She wasn't a demon. She wasn't an angel either. She was my child. A human being. And humans can lose their way. But that doesn't mean we have the right to bury them in judgment. Once, a young man, one of those who helped bury Nayib, asked her, "Auntie, why aren't you angry? Not at anyone? Not even at your daughter? Not at life?" She answered, "What's the point of anger? She can't hear it anymore. But the others still can. And if I can use my story to save even one soul, then I too have been forgiven, in part." A year later, at the site of Nayib's grave, a small stone marker was built. It didn't carry her full name. It simply read, "Here lies someone who once lost her way. And here, others have found theirs." Every year, on her death anniversary, without invitation, dozens of young people come. They bring flowers, leave handwritten notes. Some even play a recording, no music, no effects. Just a raspy, honest mother's voice singing. "Sleep now, my child, I'm still here." 1 year had passed. The wound seemed healed. But only seemed. For everyone who had known of Nayib, directly or indirectly, still carried a faint scar inside them. A kind of silent ache. Like fire beneath ash. Sakinah often sat on her porch, fingers slowly counting worn prayer beads. Eyes fixed on the horizon, where the graveyard lay. No one asked, but all knew. Every morning and every twilight, she prayed. Not to bring her daughter back to life, but to let her be born again. One day, a strange girl, maybe 18, oval-faced, shadowed eyes, came to visit. She didn't say much. She just sat in silence. As the golden light of dusk colored the mud walls, she finally broke down and said, "I'm about to do something terrible. But I read the story of your daughter online. And I thought, if anyone would understand me, it'd be you." Sakinah didn't ask what she was planning. She simply took her hand, just like she once held Nayib's on a faraway summer afternoon, and said softly, "You haven't done anything wrong yet. Wrong only truly begins when you know it's wrong. But keep walking anyway." The girl collapsed into her arms, weeping like never before. And that evening, a life was pulled back from the edge, because of a story about someone who had died. In a nearby village, a youth gathering was held. The topic: how not to lose yourself in the digital age. Strangely, the title hadn't been chosen by the school, but by a group of students. They told each other, "Let's tell Nayib's story, so none of our friends become just a name spoken only after death." And so, they reprinted the full story as a small booklet and passed it out by hand. Some cried. Some said nothing. Some folded it carefully, took it home. Not to read now, but perhaps for a moment they didn't know they'd need. A young monk, traveling through the region, heard of the grave that once smelled of death, and later, of sacred incense. He came, but performed no grand rituals, no bells, no fragrant incense. He simply knelt, pressed his palms together, and recited a short verse from the Ksitigarbha Sutra. If a being, even condemned to hell for the sin of unfilial conduct, has a relative who sincerely repents on their behalf, that soul too shall be liberated. Then he turned to Sakinah, standing quietly on the other side of the grave. Her eyes red, and smiled gently. "You have done what hundreds dared not do. Forgive a soul after the world abandoned her. And because of that, you didn't just save your daughter. You saved the living, too." One chilly afternoon, a village boy named Ibra asked his mother, "Mom, can someone who's already died still teach us something?" His mother leaned down, stroked his hair, and replied, "Yes, sweetheart. If their death was the consequence of something we're still repeating." The boy thought deeply, then nodded. He didn't know who Nayib was, but he would never forget the gentle scent of incense his mother lit every evening. A fragrance that reminded him of a young girl who once lost her way, and was finally guided home by her mother's prayer. From then on, the villagers would often say to each other, no longer with sarcasm, but with quiet reverence, "Don't rekindle the fire over old ashes." Some pain doesn't need to be relived. To understand this simple truth, Being awake in life is the greatest gift the dead leave behind. That night, the wind came early. The earth-walled house still stood, its back resting against the hill, its face turned toward the dry, wild field. The oil lamp was lit, though the moon's glow was bright enough to reveal every object, like a mirror not yet wiped clean. Sakina sat on an old mat spread before her husband's altar, her eyes gently closed, her fingers running over a worn rosary, some beads missing. In front of her sat a bowl of clear water, and a beige scarf, once belonging to Nayib, at 13. There was no one else. Just her. As it had been for years since her husband passed. Through all the days her daughter went astray. And perhaps, for the rest of this life. If no prayer was deep enough to change the next. She began whispering to the wind. But she was really speaking to her daughter. And to every child who had ever forgotten how to find their way home. My child, I forgave you. Not because you deserved it, but because I couldn't bear for you to carry a weight no soul could bear alone. You weren't evil. You were just fragile. So fragile you believed a compliment from a stranger meant more than your mother's embrace. I feared the judgment of the world more than the loneliness in your eyes. I thought giving you everything was enough. But I forgot to teach you that nothing in this world is free. Not even love. I thought you'd understand someday. But someday doesn't come for everyone. I prayed. Not for you to return. But that wherever you are now, no one would scorn you for your past. I don't need you to be an angel. I just hope, if another life awaits, that I get to guide you through 16, one more time. And this time, I won't let go. No matter how fast you run. Even if you scream that I'm suffocating you, I'll be your shadow. If it keeps you from falling into the abyss. And if God can hear me, please don't let my daughter be remembered as the girl who failed. Let her be called the one who once lost her way, but left a path behind, so others wouldn't lose theirs. Outside, the wind whispered through the straw roof, like the voice of the night itself. No one witnessed it. No one spoke. But near Nayib's grave, where the scent of incense still lingered faintly in the earth, a dry Bodhi leaf fell, touched the ground, and lay still. No one knew where it had come from. But people say, when a leaf falls, it doesn't die. It simply returns to the earth, to become nourishment for another tree yet to grow. And that night, the sky was full of stars. Nothing announced anything miraculous. But in the hearts of those who had known Nayib, for the first time in so long, they slept, without hearing the screams. Only the faintest lullaby carried on the wind. Sleep, my child. I'm still here. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share one thing this story taught you, and how you'll carry that into your life. Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story moved your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support allows us to continue crafting stories that uplift, heal, and awaken the soul. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you in the next video.